After Apple's recent WWDC event on June the 7th, much of the tech community was left longing for more with the new iPadOS update. All of us were highly anticipating a big revamp to the iPad operating system to take full advantage of the incredible power on board these devices, especially in the iPad Pros when it recently got refreshed with the new M1 chip inside. Unfortunately, in most of our eyes, we did not receive said revamp. This leaves the iPad, especially the iPad Pro, in an awkward position among Apple's lineup of hardware. But now that the iPad has more power than some PCs today, it begs the question of what is that power really for? And what is the purpose of the iPad? And the answers to these questions are more obscure than ever. In this video, I'm going to try to dissect the history of the iPad, how it evolved as Apple evolved, and what I believe the iPad will become in the future. This will probably be quite a long story, so sit back, relax, and let's look at how the iPad came to be. By the way, if you're new here, my name is Avery and I create videos about tech and student life on this channel. If at the end of this video you enjoyed what you watched, don't forget to hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel as it really helps me out. It shows your appreciation for these videos and it also makes my relatives very happy. Alright, let's dive right in. So, picture this. It's January 27th, 2010. Steve Jobs is on stage talking about whether there is a product between the smartphone and the laptop. And then, boom, the word iPad drops down in big Helvetica font. The birth of a new product lineup, designed to give you a more immersive experience than the iPhone while being more portable than a laptop. Granted, the first few years of the iPad were met with a little bit of controversy over how, quote, it's just a bigger iPhone. But it did evolve. Very quickly, consumers were buying iPads like hotcakes for exactly what Steve Jobs intended. For browsing the web, checking email, watching videos, playing games, etc. And honestly, I believe that is what the iPad is still meant to do today. It is the go-to device in your life when you want to consume any sort of content, whether it be sitting on the couch to binge watch Netflix or to play the occasional game. And while it is a pretty bad parenting strategy, an iPad has the uncanny ability to give you a break when you have a toddler. Apple even started branching out the iPad lineup by introducing the new iPad mini in 2012 and the redesigned iPad Air, both of which were much thinner and lighter than the original iPads. Apple continued to update these two core iPads annually, adding more powerful processors and adding minute features such as Touch ID and slightly better displays. But the fundamental iPad lineup didn't change much since its inception, until one September 11th, 2015, when the iPad took a giant step towards the next stage of its life. The first iPad Pro was unveiled by Tim Cook as he walked out on stage holding the monstrous 12.9-inch tablet in all its glory. This was the beginning of a new generation of iPads for Apple. The iPad Pros quickly became known as the best tablets, period. But the thing was, Apple didn't want the iPad Pro to just be a tablet. They wanted it to be your computer. Apple began to evolve the iPad Pro by refining the hardware first. They included chips that were more powerful than some PCs. They included some of the best displays that we've ever seen. They also added some much needed accessories for the iPad Pro, including the Apple Pencil that charged the wrong way and the origami style smart keyboard folio case. Apple really got people asking the question, what's a computer? with the iPad Pro, as it was heavily marketed as a device that could replace your main computer. At this point around 2017, Apple was honestly just showing off how good their hardware was. But they forgot about one other element, an element that some would say is much more important than the hardware: the software. While the iPad Pro was a marvelous piece of technology by itself, iOS really held it back from being someone's main computer. Basic tasks on a simple laptop were very tedious or even straight up impossible on an iPad, and many apps were not taking full advantage of the iPad's amazing capabilities. It was an odd move for them. Apple usually prided itself for its integration between hardware and software, but it seems as if they forgot about it for the iPad. Ironic. In October of 2018, at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, Apple gave the iPad Pro its first major design change that was the biggest aesthetic change to the iPad since it first debuted. These new iPad Pros sported new squared edges, an even thinner design somehow, and an edge-to-edge screen with little to no bezels. And don't even get me started on how freaking powerful these iPads were. And they were about as thin as a pen. Speaking of pens, the Apple Pencil finally got updated that year with the ability to magnetically charge to the side of the iPad and charge from there. Instead of, well, let's just say I'm glad they improved that. And to top it all off, Apple added USB-C to the iPad for the first time. But all these great features were quite limited because of, you guessed it, the software. While some apps could take advantage of some of the power on the iPad Pros, very few people were able to make the iPad Pros as their main computer, because while the hardware advanced, the software was left behind in the dust. Pros and tech gurus wanted a big change, and at WWDC 2019, Apple finally delivered that change. Sort of. In June of 2019, Apple announced iPad OS, the iPad's own operating system. This gave the iPad, and especially the iPad Pro, a bit more life. There were now widgets on the home screen. Multitasking was greatly overhauled with new gestures, slide over windows, and split screen modes. The iPad could now import media from an external camera or flash drive, making the USB-C port on the iPad Pros much more usable. The Files app was tweaked a little bit, and full desktop web browsing came to the iPad. This seemed like the first steps towards Apple's full commitment to the iPad being your main computer, but they weren't. You see, the iPad's power was still quite handicapped because of the apps that were available for it. They were mobile apps, not desktop ones. For example, the iPad version of Adobe's apps like Lightroom and Photoshop were way more hamstrung than the desktop versions. I don't know whether to blame Apple or software developers for this, but it's still a problem to this day. There's still things that are so much easier to do on a laptop that the iPad simply cannot do. Fast forward to April 2021 at Apple's spring-loaded event, and they announced yet another iPad Pro. Big deal, all the journalists said, until Tim Cook literally descended from the ceiling in spy gear and put the M1 chip into the iPad. Then the mood changed. We now have the insane power of the M1 MacBooks, Mac Mini, and iMac into a tablet that weighs about a pound. We could even see a bridge between macOS and iPadOS, with desktop apps running on the iPad. We were hoping for so much with this new chip, and yet we were let down again. Addressing what I said at the beginning of the video, the update to iPadOS at WWDC was quite underwhelming in that it didn't change much to take advantage of the power of the iPad again. And this is kind of where things really came to a peak. People noticed the iPad's track record of hardware that was always leaps and bounds ahead of the software, and started to question what the iPad was really for. Again, currently the iPad is experiencing a phase that most adolescents, like myself, are currently going through. The crisis of finding your identity. Is the iPad just a dead simple tablet for content consumption? Or is it meant to be a replacement for your main computer? Or is it supposed to be a secondary device to a main computer? These are questions that I think even Apple has a hard time answering, and that really scares me. So with all this in mind, considering the past and the present situations of the iPad, what is its future? I'm going to make predictions for two different iPad models. One for consumer iPads and one for the iPad Pros. For consumer iPads like the base model iPad, the iPad mini, and the iPad Air, I think two things could happen. One, they keep the exact same purpose that they've had since they were released, as tablets for content consumption and slight creative work. I think that they will still be amazing for kids and a great device to stream content on. My other prediction is that these consumer iPads may start to get phased out because of the increase in screen size on our phones and because Mac OS Big Sur looks like it should be able to be touched. Because the iPhone and the MacBook are getting so good right now, there may be a chance that there will no longer be a need for a middle ground device. The iPad Pros, on the other hand, require a bit more thinking about their future. Apple doesn't want them to be just tablets. They want them to be something more. So the iPad Pro won't ever be a consumer iPad. So there are only two real options left, either as your main device or as a secondary device. As much as Apple wants it to be, I don't think the iPad Pro will ever become someone's main computer. Apple needs to keep a distinction between their Mac lineup and iPad lineups. And if the iPad can be a really good main computer for someone, it will take away from the profits from the Mac. And Apple is really all about that bottom line, so they're probably a bit concerned about that. Also, judging by how amazing the M1 MacBooks and Macs have been, I expect them to be even better in the future and will have so much more capability in a laptop chassis than in an iPad. In my opinion, I think the future for the iPad will be as a secondary device because we've seen how well it works in that way. For example, things like Sidecar and even at WWDC this year, Universal Control proved to us that A, the iPad is an amazing secondary device, and B, it works amazingly within the Apple ecosystem. The iPad is an amazing piece of technology that has been adored by consumers for the past 11 years. There is a reason why it's basically the only tablet to consider buying today. That's because it's gotten so good to the point where consumer expectations and standards haven't actually caught up yet. But for the iPad to continue living alongside phones that are getting increasingly bigger and laptops that are getting thinner and faster, it needs to find its purpose again. And soon, or else the fate of the iPad will be very uncertain. So those are my thoughts about the iPad. This video is quite different than my other videos, but if you like this video essay style of video, please let me know in the comment section down below. Also, I'm gonna try to stick to a weekly upload schedule now, maybe every Monday, but we'll see how that plays out. As always, gently tap the like button, hit the subscribe button, and ring that notification bell to be notified whenever I release a new video. That being said, have a great day, and peace out.